Senua's Saga Hellblade 2 is a game that I've been really looking forward to. I remember seeing some badass looking gameplay and I was really intrigued by that song and dance visual that they did at the Game Awards. I just knew that it was a world that I couldn't wait to get lost in, and all of that came from someone who's never played the original game before. That is something though that I've since corrected. Actually, last week I played Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice for the first time and I released a video about my experience playing it for the first time. You should check that out. But anyway, Senua's Saga finally came out early this morning or late last night, however you want to look at it, and I've been playing it. I've been playing it non-stop, and I have a lot of thoughts I want to share with you guys. So I'm going to get into the review. I'm going to show you some raw gameplay, but before I do that, hit that subscribe button. I talk about video games all the time on this page. Day one reviews, just like this, and other video game discussions as well. But I also review movies, and I talk about TV shows. But anyway, let's talk about Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. I want to state first and foremost that this is a first impressions review. The game is on the shorter side, and based on the trophy and the chapter list, I'm well over halfway done, but I haven't beaten the game yet, and still I haven't seen all of its secrets or its reveals yet. And also, this review will be spoiler free. I'll talk about the plot, but I won't get into any super specific details about it, and all of the gameplay footage that you're seeing is from the first third of the game. But depending on how this video performs, I will definitely make a follow-up with my final thoughts once I beat the game. And so, with that being said, let's start first with all of the things that I liked about Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. I want to start first with the graphics. Graphical style does matter to me sometimes, but graphical quality rarely affects my enjoyment or my lack of enjoyment in a video game. But the whole time I was playing through Senua's Saga, I was just blown away by the graphical presentation. This has arguably the best in-game graphics that I've ever seen. Now, I don't want to put that crown on its head just yet, but it's no questions asked a top 5 game I've played in terms of how realistic the graphics are. The sunlight reflecting off the water and the rocks, the fire casting shadows in the darkness, the wetness on Senua's skin in the rain. The graphics are nothing short of just breathtaking. But weirdly enough, in certain cinematics, specifically cinematics around characters talking to each other, I noticed a sudden drop in the graphical quality and the animations. It's weirdly opposite than most games, where I feel that the in-game graphics are actually noticeably better than most of the cinematic graphics. The next thing I found myself really enjoying in Senua's Saga is surprisingly the story. The story is what I was probably the most curious about coming into this game, because I really enjoyed the narrative of the first game, but it was so self-contained and so specific that part of me thought that whatever story they came up with would feel forced or feel like we were just treading the same old water over again. But luckily, I think the writers managed to find a believable story to tell for Senua. I won't get into any, again, super specifics here, but I'm going to tell you the basic setup of the plot. The game begins with Senua on a slaver's boat. She apparently allowed herself to be captured as a way for her to find whoever or whatever is in charge of the Northmen and who's controlling and ordering all these raids on innocent villages. And she's doing this because she wants to get revenge for those she's lost, and so she can try and cut the head off of the snake, so to speak. But of course, that's just the setup. The narrative evolves in some cool ways, and just like the first game, it has strong themes about mental health and has you questioning what's real and what's imaginary. One thing I really like about the story of Senua's Saga is that there's actually somewhat of a supporting cast of characters. We meet a few people along the way who sometimes travel with Senua or even help her or are sometimes at odds with her, and there's even moments where we get to see this world or see this narrative or even see Senua herself through their eyes, through a different perspective. And I really love how the first game is all about Senua being completely isolated, how it's just her and her mind. But this was a nice change of pace. But don't get me wrong, despite the fact that this game has supporting characters, most of the journey is spent with Senua and Senua alone. Now I want to get into some of the things I found disappointing about this game, but I don't really want to call this the cons section or the negative section, because most of what I'm about to mention is still good, really good in fact, but at the same time, it's all kind of disappointing when compared to the first game, especially considering the increased budget and the development time that this game had. But even though I'm enjoying this game, and I think it's wicked immersive, they barely innovated at all. In fact, a few gameplay mechanics feel like a step back from the first game. First off is the environment puzzles. Just like the first game, you'll be doing them, and you'll be doing them quite often. But from what I've experienced so far, they are way easier to do, and they evoke little to no brain power. Again, not that the first game had super complicated puzzles, but these ones are, again, noticeably easier. Then there's the combat. Combat, for the most part, is really fun, and I enjoy doing it, just like I enjoyed doing it in the first game. But oddly enough, it feels more restrictive than it did in the first game, and that's saying a lot because, again, in the first game, almost every combat encounter felt the same as the one that came before it. It's still your basic quick attack, heavy attack, dodge, parry, and focus, but it feels so much more handholdy and way easier than it did in the first game as well. I've noticed in this game, I get hit far more often, but at the same time, I die a lot less. It's weird. And something about the way the camera moves and how the enemies move and how most combat encounters involve only one enemy at a time, it weirdly makes combat feel more like a interactive cutscene instead of like combat gameplay. But don't get me wrong, the combat can still be fun, it can still be heart-pounding and immersive, and if you enjoyed the combat in the first game, you'll certainly still like it here. Just where I wish they innovated, it feels like they did the opposite, which is disappointing, and I can say the same thing about exploration as well. I didn't want this game to be open world. I like that these games are linear, but at the same time, I hoped that there was a little more freedom than in the first game. But again, this game feels even more linear than the first game did, where the first game gave us at least the illusion of openness sometimes by making us work to solve puzzles, or having certain areas be more wide and less narrow, or throwing combat that involved multiple enemies at us. This second game doesn't really have much of that at all. It's there sometimes for sure, but to a noticeably smaller degree. But arguably my biggest critique with this game so far is how it doesn't really give us much time to breathe with the gameplay. The first game was a near perfect blend of gameplay and cinematics, but this second game, again, from what I've experienced, turned the dial way too far in favor of cinematics. It's like every 10 steps you take, the game takes control away from you. Sometimes combat will ensue, and you'll be into it, fighting for your life, trying to dodge and attack, and then the game, again, will take control from you. It happens way too often in this game. Also, much like the first game, this game has incredible sound design. Some of the best, no questions asked. But I found the sound design to not be nearly as effective as it was in the first game. The soundtrack doesn't hit nearly as hard as it does when you'd expect it to, and the voices in Senua's head aren't as all-consuming or as interesting to listen to. In the first game, I loved hearing them ramble on and on and on, but in this game, I often ignore them, and I drown them out, and that's, again, disappointing for me. And I know it makes sense within the narrative because Senua's found some sort of peace with the voices that are in her mind. They're not constantly nagging her and against her, which was part of the immersion in the first game. So I know it makes sense narrative, but it makes for less interesting sound design, at least in my opinion. And look, I know it sounds like I just shit all over this game, but I want to make it clear I am enjoying this experience. I absolutely think this is a good game at the end of the day, but it's just disappointing because all of the places where they could have and they should have innovated, all the places where they should have made this game feel bigger, they didn't. And it actually feels like they did the opposite in a lot of ways. But who knows, maybe you'll completely disagree with me. Keep in mind, I literally just played the first game, so I'm more susceptible to direct comparison. If it's been a while since you've played the first game, I'm sure you'll enjoy the hell out of this game even more than I am. But anyway, that's my quick and brief thoughts after playing Senua's Saga Hellblade 2 for a good handful of hours. Have you played it yet? If you have, let me know what you've thought about it in the comments. And if you haven't played it yet, let me know what are your expectations going into it, or are you going to ignore it completely? And once again, consider subscribing if you haven't already. Depending on how this video performs, I will make a follow-up. But anyway, thank you for watching, especially if you watch this far.
Ready.
You should not have come here, child.